when you buy any of these early stage projects, you have to understand that you could see a minus 85% or minus 90% in your money. But in the long term, on average, you are looking for multiples of what you put in.
Thanks for everyone for joining us. We're going to quickly run through what the drama is all on Solana and what's happening there, and maybe what it looks like for the future of the project. I got Justin on again. He's going to break that down. So start.
Yeah, so Solana has had, I think, 5 outages just this year. It's pretty brutal to have that many outages. And we're having a lot of people just shit all over Solana because they're saying, no change should ever have this many outages. The technology is dead, where there's fundamental flaws, sell all your soul. And I'm sure some of those people saying that are buying a soul, but I think the way you have to look at this is that this is an early technology. Not only is it early, but it's also an extremely complicated piece of technology. I mean, the Solana blockchain is at least an order of magnitude more complicated than Ethereum in terms of all the moving parts in that software. And having outages is just a natural part of maturing as technology and as a developer ecosystem. Yes, there's definitely things that Solana could have done better, that core team could have managed their testing cycle better. They could have focused more on having alternative clients. But I think that what is most important is that Solana delivers the vision that they set out to do, which is the fastest blockchain on the market and giving you tens of thousands of transactions per second for very cheap, fractions of a penny per transaction. And doing that is very difficult. The technology is really complicated to make that happen, but the roadmap is there. There's no fundamental blockers getting there. It's just a matter of time for that software to mature. And what's going to have to happen is Solana is going to have to continue to build out their software, build out the nodes, and go through a ossifying period where they sort of freeze the protocol. They stop making as many disruptive changes to the code. And then we have a period of stability, a year or two where there's not a whole lot of changes. And we just basically want the network to be stable and not have outages during that time period. And that is the only way that Solana is going to win back the favor of the market and prove that they're stable enough to run serious applications. And I think if you look at the early history of Ethereum, there were similar types of issues going on. I mean, everybody remembers the 2016 Shanghai denial of service attacks and a number of bugs in the EVM. Bitcoin also had bugs in the early days. There was a famous overflow bug where someone sent themselves a negative amount of Bitcoin and printed Bitcoins out of thin air. I mean, this kind of stuff happens in early technology that's really complex. So I don't think that the people that are saying Solana is dead because they had a number of outages are by any means correct. Those people are basically either facetious, they're just trying to FUD Solana to either pump their own bags or to just depress the price so they can buy Sol at a cheaper price, or they're extremely naive and they've never invested in early stage technology before, because there's always a risk of this stuff happening. What I say to these people, especially a lot of Ethereum maximalists that are, doing their victory laps. Oh, we told you so. Solana, it's dead in the water. If ETH2 has an outage, which it very well could, I mean, the merge and the ETH2 proof of stake system, it is also very complicated software. And once that network is live and it's running and it's really being hit hard by lots of transactions and lots of users, we could very well see an outage there. And I guarantee all these Ethereum people that said having an outage equals dead, they're suddenly going to change their tune when Ethereum has an outage. And it's like, oh, guys, don't worry. It's early technology. This kind of stuff happens. But they're right if they start saying that, because that is the way you have to think about it. It's early technology. Yes, there are going to be bugs. There are going to be outages. And if you're going to deploy an app on one of these networks, you need to be aware of this possibility. And only after the protocol has ossified and there's been a long period of time where it's been battle tested by real world use cases without outages, only then can you say it's ready to deploy enterprise applications and so forth. And Solana is just not there yet. They still have a lot of things to implement in the code to get to their final vision. And that's just going to continue to be a lot of changes, and changes equal risk of bugs. So that is really my message. It's just, it's early stage. There will be bugs, but the roadmap is pretty clear and the roadmap is really exciting. And I think that if you believe in that, if you believe in the vision of Solana, now is a great time to buy. Same thing when a lot of these crypto projects get hacked. Yes, there's always a risk anything can get hacked. That doesn't change the fundamental vision. That doesn't change the fundamental technology.
So what I've seen from just, sitting in my seat over the last year or two is that maybe let's say starting with Ethereum is once a layer one has a certain amount of transactions happening per second, right? There seems to be a problem with the network, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in the space kind of then moves over to this other layer one or this other layer one, right? And so Solana's kind of taking the position of being able to settle those transactions on its layer one without moving to a layer two, right? Where everyone else is already kind of past the point saying we need layer twos because it's just not feasible. Are we going to end up seeing just the same thing here? We've seen everywhere that once you hit certain bytes of data that it just can't be handled on a layer one if it's decentralized.
Eventually, yes, that blockchain, like all blockchains, will run into a scaling ceiling where you can no longer fit any more transactions in those blocks. At the end of the day, it comes down to how much data per second can you put on this blockchain. And once you hit that ceiling, now you start having to pay higher fees. Everyone's competing for that block space, as we already see in Ethereum and Bitcoin. So it will eventually run into the same problem. Now, it's going to be a while before it hits that. So, there's still going to be years of really cheap transactions and instant confirmations on your transactions on the Solana blockchain. But it will eventually hit that. And at that point, yes, you will probably see layer twos get popular on Solana. And the layer twos there work the same way they do on Ethereum, where it acts like a separate blockchain that you kind of bridge over to, but it's very tightly connected. It's really easy to move money back and forth between. And there's basically security guarantees about the layer two. As long as the layer one is secure and you trust that security in those nodes, then yes, the layer two, you also, by extension, trust that. So we're going to see a similar thing. But I think the key point about Solana and why it's not as much of a layer two focused roadmap, even on the long term, is that Solana is not really designed to be this global base layer of a financial system. It's not really designed to be surviving a nuclear apocalypse where you can still have your nodes running on satellites and things like that. That's more of Ethereum's forte, where you can run a node on a cheap laptop, right? And you have just thousands and thousands of nodes that are run by your home users. Solana, you pretty much have to run a node in a data center or a beefy computer at home with a really good internet connection. And that choice was deliberate to go for this different market segment, which is very high speed financial applications. Think high speed trading or high frequency micropayments, streaming payments, things like that, or large composable applications where you've got application building on top of application and you just layers and layers and layers of this financial system where all of that computation that you have to do just to send a token or something, that won't fit in a standard blockchain. But Solana, those blocks are big enough and fast enough that you can fit a large amount of computation and memory into those transactions. And there are going to be apps that are not possible on these other chains unless you have something like Solana. And so I think when you look at Solana and what it's built to do, think the fastest decentralized exchange in the world. That's going to run on Solana. It's not going to run on a layer two. It's not going to run on Ethereum. It's not going to run on even Avalanche, right? None of these other chains have the transactions per second capability that Solana has even today. Just go take a look at realtps.net. They show you a 7-day average of the real transactions per second, which for Solana, that means not including the validator transactions, because Solana, when validators send each other messages, they count that as a transaction in some cases. So if you take that out, even with that, Solana is still hundreds of transactions per second faster than the next chain. And that's not even hitting the block limits yet. So if you're building a decentralized exchange or a futures exchange or an options market, something where it's a financial use case where you need people to have the fastest possible transactions for the cheapest you can get, Solana is really where you want to build that right now. Now, if you're building something that you want to survive the nuclear apocalypse, or you want it to be a non-sovereign money, something like that, yeah, you probably want to build that on Ethereum or on Ethereum layer 2. So there's just trade-offs in the blockchain space, and depending on the application, they select different trade-offs. And that's really the way to think about Solana in the grander picture of these other blockchains.
What's the difference between having like that 1 megabyte block size versus like a 10? And how does that benefit the network?
So as you increase the block size, you can fit more transactions per second. In Bitcoin's case, right, there's a block every 10 minutes, and it's like 2 to 4 megabytes block size, depending on the types of transactions in there. So if they double that, then yeah, you could fit twice as many transactions in that 10-minute window and effectively double your TPS. However, you would double the growth rate of that blockchain, and you would double the amount of CPU power that you need to run a node, and also dramatically increase the amount of RAM you need and the amount of internet bandwidth you need. So you just increase all of the computing requirements of your nodes when you increase the block size. And it can very quickly get to the point where you have to run an enterprise class server in a data center once you get to a certain size, especially when you're starting up a node for the first time and you have to download the whole blockchain and run through all of those transactions, or even at some point in the past. It just takes a lot of computing power to do that. So you trade off the ability for users to run nodes at home on consumer grade hardware when you increase the block size. And that decreases decentralization, which decreases sovereignty, because a lot of these chains were designed to be secure against state level attacks, where a large government says, hey, we're going to go door to door, and anybody running these nodes, we've got a problem. And when you've got that sort of thing going on, if all your nodes are in data centers, it's really easy to shut down the nodes. You just send a cease and desist order to the data center. But if people can run nodes on consumer grade hardware or even smartphones, it's much harder to stop that blockchain. And as long as there's a certain amount of nodes that are running globally, this blockchain continues to run, and users can continue to put new computers on the network. So that's really what you want for a blockchain that is designed to be maximally sovereign and resistant to state level attacks, like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, and some of the other blockchains. But again, you trade off performance there. And so if you want maximum performance for high speed finance, you're going to have to make some trade-offs, and you're going to probably end up with nodes that are really beefy computers.
So Ethereum running about, I think, like 1 megabyte block size allows all these different participants on the network, right?
Yeah.
And someone's running 3 to 5 or 10 megabyte is going to require more expensive hardware, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also block time, right? Because Ethereum has 15-second periods between blocks. And so you really have to figure out the throughput, which is you take the block size, you multiply that by the blocks per second. So you calculate that out based on the block time. And then that'll give you your megabytes per second that you are putting into this blockchain. And that is a good number to think about, like how many megabytes per second is this network processing? And the more you increase that, the more you increase the node requirements.
So do you think as obviously computers become more powerful, right, to where maybe everyone's running at home, does that naturally then across all networks, do we increase that block size over time over the next 10 to 20 years as that naturally also gets faster?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. As consumer grade hardware gets better, yeah, we will naturally increase that. And that's one of the things I like about Solana is that the blockchain is designed to scale as faster computers show up on the network. Whereas other blockchains, there's going to be some manual code changes that have to be done, like manually increasing the block size or the block times, things like that, which is it's not that big of a deal. But yes, over time, we will see these limits raised, and it'll get to the point where you can, what used to take a beefy MacBook to run a node, you'll be able to run that on your smartphone as an app in the background or something. And so that's the great thing about Moore's law, is that we continue to increase this, and blockchains will certainly benefit from there, and we'll get more scalability there. But we do have to scale faster than that. That can only get us so far. And if we need to onboard the world as users on the blockchain, and every time you get into an Uber, that's like 5 transactions. And every time you open your fridge door, it issues you an NFT on chain. It's a lot of transactions for each person in the world. So that's really where we need to scale today.
So maybe we all need our own layer 2 on Ethereum, right? I mean, that's it. Everyone has their own.
Yeah, maybe we'll have our own layer twos, and yeah, that's where you can get all your useless NFTs on it.
Yeah. So on the Solana, right? Some investors might be looking at this as an opportunity, obviously with the price coming down and the FUD, but also on the other side, maybe looking at it as because of these outages occurring and maybe a lot of fully diluted valuation projects that have showed up on the network over the last year through DeFi. There's a lot of people that might be turned off by the project. Kind of how do you see that playing out over the next year or two? And how do they keep relevant as we move forward into the next cycle and not be another EOS?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, yeah, fully diluted valuations. Of course, it's an issue, and investors need to see, what is the unlock schedule of these coins. In some cases, there's coins that are just sort of perpetually locked up in a DAO or some foundation, and it's not clear when they're going to hit the market, if ever, or if that foundation is just sort of occasionally selling like the Ethereum Foundation does to fund developer costs. In that case, I wouldn't be too worried about those coins because the foundation obviously doesn't want to just dump on themselves and trash their own project. But if those coins are held by seed investors, VCs, and so forth, there's a potential that they have either a concurrent unlock, they all get unlocked at once, or just this becomes a long-term rate of inflation, essentially, as these coins just kind of linearly vest. And so investors need to factor that in and see, is there a risk of a lot of new coins hitting the market? However, I will say that there are plenty of cases where there are unlocks that happen and it's not that big of a deal for the price, because a lot of these coins, in the case of like VCs, are locked up in 10-year VC funds anyway. And these VC funds don't want to sell during a bear market. They don't want to just dump at a depressed price when they still believe in the technology and they invested in it because they believe in it. And they don't want to tarnish the projects that they invested a lot of time and energy into just because they want to get their money out all of a sudden. In the case of Solana, everyone was worrying about an unlock. I think it was like early 2021 or late 2020. There was like a large vesting cliff of a lot of VC investors. And this was around the time when Sam Bankman-Fried notoriously said, "I'll buy all the Sol from anyone at $3, right? Sell it to me if you believe the FUD that these unlocks are going to dump." And of course, that ended up being right because no one dumped. No one wanted to dump at $3, and I don't think they want to dump it at $40 either. I think the people that invested in Solana are in it for the long term, and they're only going to sell when then they see this technology is mature and has an actual large market that is running on top of it. And, they're not just going to crash the price by dumping. So if you invest in quality projects, I don't think these unlocks are that big of a deal because, again, the people that believed in the project that early to invest money into it at an early stage, nothing has changed in the vision. They still are in it for the long term.
Obviously the price is down 85% from all-time highs, right?
Yeah.
Typically when there's an 85% drawdown, most buyers mentally can't make the moves, push the button to make a purchase, right? Because they just either believe it's going to keep going down or whatever. So therefore we have those people that buy the tops and sell the bottoms, right? What are some ways I think we're looking at this for the next year or two as one question? And two, do we also maybe think it goes in a similar direction as Ethereum did in last cycle?
Yeah, certainly looking at the previous cycles can give you a good idea of market consensus. I mean, previous cycles, there's no like fundamental law of physics that says you have to repeat the previous cycles. So when people are saying, "Oh, we're down this much from the highs, we're guaranteed this is the bottom," things like that, it's not really true. It's all about flows and at this point, the macroeconomic situation. So, and also the fundamental growth of the technology and user adoption, which I truly believe is an exponential trend. And eventually these things are going to balance out and the exponential trend is going to take over and then we'll see a bull market again. But in terms of the cycles and buying at the top or selling at the bottom, I mean, that is classic investor psychology 101, because people are more likely to buy when they have euphoria and they feel really excited and everyone else feels really excited about this thing. And they're more likely to sell when everyone is depressed and worried and stressed out about this thing continuing to have further losses. And no one likes to see their money take an 85% downside. But when you're investing in early stage technology, that kind of volatility should be expected. And when you buy any of these early stage projects, you have to understand that you could see a minus 85%, a minus 90% in your money. But in the long term, on average, you are looking for multiples of what you put in. And when you invest in something that has exponential growth potential, like crypto networks, that is the expectation. And that is why people have made such great returns in this technology and why they will continue to make great returns on the long run. So you have to watch out for this investor psychology. You've got to ask yourself, am I buying because I just feel bullish because there's just a lot of euphoria going around? Or am I buying because I truly believe that this technology will continue to have exponential growth and continue to innovate in its market vertical? That is really the question you have to ask yourself. And the same thing goes for selling. Are you selling because you just feel really stressed out, because you just can't take seeing the red candles every day on the charts? If that's why you're selling, you're probably going to end up regretting that sale, because the only way that works out is if you sell and then you rebuy it when it's further down. You know, if it takes another 50% minus 50% and then you buy back in, okay, maybe we could say that sale was worth it. But if you're already feeling really stressed out here and you want to sell, when it gets down here, you're going to be like, oh man, I'm really glad I sold. And you're not going to buy the actual bottom. You're only going to buy back in once it goes back up another 100%. And then you're just going to end up having half the amount of coins that you had in the first place, and potentially some extra taxes to deal with. So it's really not a good idea to try to trade these cycles unless you really know what you're doing. You're an experienced trader. The best thing you can do is to just dollar cost average in when prices are depressed. You just nibble on the things you like every now and then, monthly, whatever. And you understand that there's volatility ahead, that it's going to be a couple years potentially before you see any gains on any of this. But if you truly believe in the technology, then this is going to work out to be a great investment. And that is really the way you have to think about this. It's long term, it's early stage, it's highly volatile stuff. Time in the market, it's a fool's errand.
Last cycle, there were names like Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, etc., that didn't see the same all-time highs this time around, right? Now, someone might be looking at the existing layer ones as the opportunity, and one like Solana. How do we know, or how do we start looking at it that the appropriate time to enter, that we're not getting into those picks that may not reach those all-time highs again in the next cycle?
Yeah, this is where it gets tricky, because you have to really understand what you're investing in. You have to really understand the competition and everything about these projects. And so you need to do a fundamental dive on the things that you're considering. You need to look at things like the level of innovation. Is this technology really innovative and ahead of its competitors? Does it have a great core team that is building it and that is continuing to ship code and continuing to release new products? Does it have a solid community behind it, right? Especially developer community. You know, you want to see the developers, especially for layer ones, you want to see developers forking things on GitHub and a lot of activity there, and people talking about developing it on Twitter, right? You want to see a lot of that, because that is going to tell you that other people also agree this technology is valid. And, lastly, you want to see that in the case of a DAO or something like that, that it has money to continue to fund things through the bear market, that it can actually survive this and not just, end up with nothing to incentivize anyone. So investors really have to look at the quality of the projects, because this bear market is going to cause things that don't have quality to die off and never see new highs.
So let's leave off with one last question here. People are trying to underwrite Solana or other layer ones, right? We've seen AOL. Is the Google of layer ones in front of us? Or do you really think in 10 years that we will see these will all be looked at as AOL?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I think there's a good chance that certainly a few of them that exist today will be around in 10 years and will be very widely used applications. And everyone who invested in it now will be patting themselves on the back if they held through the volatility through that time, or they bought during the bear markets. That's why you have to spread out your bets. You can't just put it all in one basket, because if that one does not end up coming to fruition, or it gets beaten by competitors, or something new on the block obsoletes it, then yeah, you're out of luck. So you need to pick probably in the range of 5 to 10 projects is going to be what most people can handle and a good level of diversification, and pick things that you've really done some good research on, that you really think meet a lot of the criteria for a project that has innovation and staying power, and then don't sell the bottoms. And that's really it.
All right, awesome. Let's leave it up there for all listeners who would like to hear some of the Soul Bull news from Justin. What's the best way for them to follow you?
Follow me on Twitter at JGrizzled1, JGRIZZLED1, and give me likes, give me comments, or hit me in the DMs.
Everyone, like, subscribe, and until next time, later.
Bye, guys.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching my latest interview. If you like what you saw, please click the subscribe button below to become a member of the Joe Robert community. Be sure to hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you always know when I post a new video. Tell me what you thought about the content in the comments below. I always read them and would love to answer any of your questions.